So yesterday, I went to the theaters to go see the new Deadpool movie, and after seeing the movie, I thought of wanting to make a movie review. I know this is kind of something different to my channel, but I might as well try out new things, I guess. So here is my full review on the movie Deadpool and Wolverine. Where do I even begin with this travesty of a movie? The Deadpool and Wolverine crossover was supposed to be the cinematic event of the decade, but instead, we were treated to an agonizing 2-hour reminder that sometimes, just because something sounds good on paper doesn't mean it should ever see the light of day. This film is a masterclass in how to ruin not one but two beloved characters in a single, disastrous outing. First off, let's talk about the plot, or the complete lack thereof. The movie opens with Deadpool doing what he does best, mouthing off and killing bad guys in increasingly ludicrous ways. This time, though, the writers seem to have forgotten that there's supposed to be a story amidst the chaos. Instead, we get a series of loosely connected action scenes that barely qualify as a narrative. Wolverine is shoehorned into the mess as if the writers realized halfway through production that they needed something, anything, to justify calling this a crossover. The entire plot feels like it was pieced together by a committee of fanboys who had no idea what makes these characters work. We're taken on a roller coaster ride of incoherent storytelling, jumping from one overblown set piece to another, with no regard for pacing or coherence. You'd think that with two such iconic characters, the writers would have been able to come up with something compelling, but instead, we're left with a movie that feels like a poorly executed fan fiction brought to the big screen. The pacing is abysmal. The movie lurches from scene to scene without any sense of flow or rhythm. One moment, Deadpool is cracking jokes, more on those later, and the next Wolverine is brooding, like he's back in some mid-2000s X-Men movie. There's no balance, no sense of build-up, and certainly no payoff. It's like the movie is on fast forward, cramming in as much mindless action and juvenile humor as possible without giving the audience a moment to catch their breath or, heaven forbid, care about what's happening. Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool is starting to wear thin, and that's a hard truth fans need to face. In the first Deadpool movie, his non-stop quips and fourth-wall-breaking antics were a breath of fresh air. By the time the second movie rolled around, it was clear that the formula was starting to show cracks. In this crossover, those cracks have become gaping chasms. Reynolds is still charming, but the character has become a parody of itself. The jokes are lazier than ever, relying on tired pop culture references and gross-out humor that feels like it was ripped straight from a teenage boy's wet dream. And the fourth wall breaks, once clever, now they're so incessant that you start to wonder if the writers forgot how to tell a story without them. What's even more infuriating is the way Deadpool's character has been reduced to nothing more than a one-dimensional clown. The moments of emotional depth that made him relatable in the previous films are completely absent here. Instead, we get a caricature of Deadpool, someone who is all jokes and no heart. By the halfway point, I was begging for the movie to give him something, anything, to do other than crack wise and kill people in increasingly absurd ways. What's even more infuriating is the way Deadpool's character has been reduced to nothing more than a one-dimensional clown. The moments of emotional depth that made him relatable in the previous films are completely absent here. Instead, we get a character of Deadpool, someone who is all jokes and no heart. By the halfway point, I was begging for the movie to give him something, anything, to do other than crack wise and kill people in increasingly absurd ways. And then there's Wolverine. Hugh Jackman, who so gracefully bowed out of the role with the masterpiece that was Logan, should have stayed far away from this train wreck. Seeing him dragged back into the claws for this cash grab is nothing short of depressing. Wolverine, once the epitome of gritty, tortured heroism, is now just a grumpy old man who looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. There's no depth to his character here, no exploration of the pain and tragedy that made him so compelling in the first place. Instead, we're left with the shell of Wolverine, a character going through the motions, serving no purpose other than to remind us that yes, this is a crossover with Deadpool. The much-anticipated chemistry between Reynolds and Jackman is non-existent. On paper, this should have been an electric pairing, but in practice, it's as flat as a soda left out overnight. The banter between Deadpool and Wolverine, which should have been the highlight of the film, is forced and awkward. It's like watching two actors who've been told to improvise without any direction or understanding of their characters. The humor feels contrived, with the film desperately trying to recreate the magic of their off-screen banter, but failing miserably. It's clear that the writers thought they could coast on the audience's affection for these actors, without bothering to give them anything interesting or meaningful to do. Visually, the movie is a mess. The action sequences are overblown to the point of absurdity. Remember when action scenes had stakes? When you actually cared about what was happening on screen? Not here. Every fight feels like it was designed by a 12-year-old who just discovered CGI. There's no weight to the combat, no sense of danger or consequence. Characters bounce back from injuries that would kill lesser men, and the blood and guts are so over the top that they lose any impact they might have had. The R rating, which once promised a grittier, more adult take on superhero films, is now just an excuse to throw in as much gratuitous violence and profanity as possible. It's all so shallow, so desperate to shock and awe, that it forgets to engage. The special effects, too, are hit or miss. At times, the CGI is laughably bad, with characters looking like plastic dolls in a video game cutscene. Even the more polished effects feel soulless, lacking the artistry and craftsmanship that make truly great action sequences stand out. Instead of feeling like a natural extension of the story, the CGI is just another layer of noise piled onto an already cluttered and confusing film. As for the supporting cast, who even cares? They're all cardboard cutouts, thrown into the mix with no real purpose other than to pad out the runtime. Villains are one-dimensional, forgettable, and lack any real menace. Allies are there to provide the occasional quip or exposition dump, and then fade into the background. There's no character development, no arcs, no reason to invest in anyone other than the two leads, and even that's a stretch. The soundtrack is yet another area where the film fails miserably. Instead of enhancing the action or adding emotional depth, the music feels like it was slapped together from a rejected playlist of generic, uninspired tracks. There's no memorable theme, no iconic score that sticks with you after the credits roll. It's all so bland, so unremarkable, that it just blends into the background noise of the film, forgotten as soon as it's heard. The direction is equally uninspired. It's clear that the director had no real vision for this movie, other than to make it as loud and chaotic as possible. The camera work is erratic, the editing is choppy, and there's no sense of style or cohesion. It's like the film was cobbled together from different shoots, with no one bothering to ensure that the final product made any sense. The result is a disjointed, jarring experience that leaves you wondering how anyone thought this was ready for release. And let's not even get started on the tone. Is this supposed to be a comedy? An action movie? A drama? The film can't seem to decide, and the result is a tonal mess. 1 minute, we're supposed to be laughing at Deadpool's antics. The next, we're supposed to care about Wolverine's tortured soul. But because the movie fails so spectacularly in delivering either, we end up caring about neither. In conclusion, the Deadpool-Wolverine movie is an unforgivable mess that squanders every bit of potential it had. What should have been a thrilling, character-driven story about two of Marvel's most iconic anti-heroes is instead a bloated, lazy, and painfully unfunny spectacle that does a disservice to everyone involved, especially the fans. If this is the future of superhero movies, then we're in for a very bleak time indeed. Anyway, this is the end of my review. See you next time.